Welcome to the MSL Lead Chronicles. It's a podcast on a mission in medical affairs and leadership. I'm Mary Morton, and along with my buddy, Chad Fellers, we're going to have casual talk about important topics and challenges in leadership. So whether you want to elevate or further develop as a leader, or your ambition is to transition to a leadership role, you've tuned into the right podcast, and we are so glad you're here. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome back to MSL Lead Chronicles podcast. We're so glad that you are here. I'm your host, Chad Fellers, and joined by my friend and colleague, Mary. I'm looking younger every day, Morton. Mary, one day we're going to have a specific segment that's focused on your anti-aging secrets. I certainly need this. Look at all my gray hair that I've had for the past 10 years, but that's really for another day.
Really, am I responsible for any of those gray hairs, though?
No comments. We don't have enough time to really get into that. Nevertheless, to our listeners out there, thanks so much again for joining us on our medical affairs leadership journey. For those of you who this is your first time listening, this is a venue for casual conversation about topics that are core to those who currently lead or aspire to lead within medical affairs. We have great conversations set for you today with an amazing guest. I'm sure you've seen some of her posts and things on LinkedIn. Mary will introduce her in just a moment. Before we do, we want to stick to what we've been doing over the past few episodes, and that's first recapping our recent conversation, and that was the key takeaways on the importance of teamwork and collaboration. We've had a lot of great response from you, both on LinkedIn as well as reaching out in our networks. Thank you for the feedback on that. Just want to share that again in case you haven't had a chance to listen. First, there's two. So the first one is, remember that as leaders of remote teams, we must understand the types of challenges that might impact our team, our teamwork and collaboration. And then the second is fostering this teamwork and collaboration with remote teams requires intentional efforts and the use of effective communication and collaboration tools. Hopefully you've been able to find different ways to implement some of this, to challenge one another. We've definitely, like I said, we've had some great discussion and feedback. Look forward to continuing to hear your thoughts as we build and develop one another. But with that, let's go ahead and transition and get kicked off for today. Mary, let me throw it over to you to introduce the amazing guest that we have.
Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to tell you guys the topic, because then I feel like you'll, if you know her and if you have been following some of the things she posts on LinkedIn, you'll know why I picked her. So the title of this one is called More Hiring, Less Firing, Making the Right Choice the First Time. So, I noticed a lot of the resources, and this is another thing that we said when we started this podcast is, we see gaps in what's available as resources on social media and whatnot for this grouping of people. And one great example is whenever you're seeing things about interviewing tips, it's always for the candidates, right? We spend a lot of time telling candidates how they can best interview to get the job, but we're forgetting about the interviewer. And, in my experience as a recruiter, I see companies hire people that I'm surprised they've hired. And obviously my thought is, where's the problem? How is it that they're hiring the wrong people? And not all the time, but, I think that, these hiring managers are great at what they do, but they're not full-time interviewers. And so we want to try to accomplish the task of trying to help everyone become a better interviewer and hire the person that you mean to hire. Okay, so now that brings me to our guest. You've been sitting on here for 2.5 minutes. You already know who it is. It's Carol Heggie. I'm a bit of a fangirl, I'm not gonna lie. So Carol's been in the industry for about 20 years. She's led medical affairs teams globally, and most recently was the VP of Medical Excellence and Field Medical with Takeda US, and has now joined a company called iGen as their president. So Carol and I kind of became fast friends, kindred spirits in our love of Shane McGowan and the Pogues, and for our canine babies. But I've been drawn to her for her Ask Me Anything series that she does on LinkedIn. And so if you're not following that, you need to get on that. That's Carol, Carol, Heggie, Heggie. It was the third AMA that really made me say, all right, dang it, I need to get a hold of her and talk to her about this. So the question that Carol received, I'm going to read it here real quick. What is the one item on a resume from a PhD with all lab work and research history looking to land their first MSL role that would make you take a closer look? And you answered this question, but more importantly, elaborated on what the interview should look like and the discussions would look like. And that's when I knew you were the one for this, this discussion, because the way that you went about interviewing or describing how you would interview a person like that. Yeah. So,
and it
I loved
always
it.
gives me a little thrill, because I can remember the raw energy that he brought to that interview. You know, the way it makes the hairs on your arms stand up. I can still remember how he made me feel. And I think that that's maybe going to be a core theme in today's discussion, is how you communicate and make the person that's interviewing you tingle all over.
Yeah. So for anybody who's listened to the podcast, they know you get this question every guest, and usually it's chat, and I'll mix it up. But Carol, what can you tell us something about you that nobody or barely anybody knows?
You might have to edit this out, because really nobody knows this except my husband. But I have edited 3 audiobooks, not edited, narrated, read 3 audiobooks. And I can't, under a pseudonym, so don't go looking for me under my name. And I daren't tell you what that pseudonym is, because they're a little on the spicy side.
Oh.
So yeah, I tried out. There are sites where you can go and try out to be a reader. And I love audiobooks. I listen to audiobooks all the time.
Yeah.
So I did.
That
And
is
they're
so
set,
cool.
yeah, they're set in the Highlands of Scotland, and they're a little on the spicy side. Historical romances.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna
Carol, I've learned something.
on
Wow.
on Audible later.
That's right.
Checking those out.
I love it. The shock factor. I mean, you just added, I thought I brought the shock when talking about the anti-aging things from Mary, but that was good. That was,
No one knows about that. My husband knows, because he's like, what are you doing down there for hours? You know, sitting with your big boom microphone and your, you know, all of that. I was like, just doing something. So that's what I was doing.
Wow.
So good. So good.
Well, so now that we've got that out of the way, I'm not going to be editing that out, I don't think.
Oh,
but I guess this is the point where we usually kind of get to the key takeaways.
Mary and I have talked about this at length. And for me, and I have interviewed across the globe, China, Brazil, Colombia, the USA, Canada, Australia, Europe, hundreds of MSLs. And I think for me, what is really important as a hiring manager is to know what you're looking for in the candidate that you're trying to hire. And I know that sounds really elementary, but it's a lot of things. It's making sure that your job description is really telling your candidates exactly what it is you're looking for, and not just, we need an MSL for gastroenterology. And I think that the next thing that is really important is working with your talent acquisition or your screeners to help them understand what it is you're looking for. Then I think that the next thing that you have to do is, having established what that hiring process that you want to have is, yes, I'm prepared to see brand new to industry people. You know, maybe you are prepared to take someone that comes straight from academia. Maybe you're prepared to take someone that's just past their PhD. Is deciding who will interview with you, because your eyes are not always the best eyes. So assemble a team. If you are a highly collaborative environment, I would actually say involve some of your market and strategy partners, not your district sales manager, but maybe your market and strategist or your market access lead, someone from Medcom that can talk about scientific narrative. I think it's good to have a more open panel. And those for me are the two things. What's your criteria and what's your process going to be? If you get that off the bat, you've already hit your first home run of the 3 that you need.
Yeah. And then, I added the last one is to trust your gut on a candidate. So I thought that would be a really good takeaway, because when I think about when I've made hiring mistakes, it's when I tried to apply some sort of logic to it. But something in the pit of my stomach said, don't do it. And I did it anyway.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone where they weren't both aligned. And I went with not my gut, that I hired the right person, or that they still work for me. So
Mary, do you want to drive the first part of the conversation, or where do we want to dig in first?
Yeah. So why don't we get into the first takeaway, which is, as you said, you got to know who you're looking for.
Yeah.
This was actually a really interesting one to me, because I can think of one client who used to use the exact same job description every time they hire. I mean, I worked with this company for 8 years. The job description looked exactly the same. It was generic. It still showed that they would take a bachelor's degree when they wouldn't, which, what does that do? That piles on work to the talent acquisition people to screen out those people they know. So, I mean, I think going through the job description is very important. I also, I guess it kind of works for me, but have some clients that call me and say, yeah, we've been trying to fill this job, and none of the candidates that are applying match what we're looking for. And I look at their job description, I'm like, well, of course not, because your job description isn't telling people a lot of them don't even have the therapeutic area in them. And I say that not all of them, and not the majority of them, but a lot, a surprising number wouldn't have that in there. So how I think I'd like to put it to you guys, and start with Carol. When you have a position to fill, how do you conceptualize what that person kind of looks like?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think I'll split it like this. If it's a brand new team, I think I go in with a more generic view of generic MSL. And as you start to build your team out, and you're looking at the dynamics of your team, the different personalities, the different mixes across your team, you may want to start to skew one way or another towards having people with more experience or not. I can give you a really good example of this.
Yeah.
There was a manager that we put in place at my previous company to build out a new team in a rare space. And she was a force to be reckoned with, because she knew she wanted a mix of experienced versus new. But in the new category, to have experience within the clinical or hospital environment, but she also wanted some academic experience in the team. She wanted not everyone to have the same type of personality. She wanted the introvert extrovert mix. She wanted the kind of green, blue, yellow, red mix of personality types across her team. And I tell you, she did that. But it was exhausting for her because she had to work really closely with talent. And at one point actually said, I want this MSL, but it's weighting my balance to one side. I really need to have more of a mix. And she did a great job with that. But it was really key for her to have that almost constant communication with her talent partner to be able to say, okay, I'm quite prepared and very open now to have that clinical experience, no MSL experience mix. Let's go look for it.
Why did she feel like, and this kind of keys in a little bit, why did she feel like that mix was necessary for the success of this new team?
Yeah. So it was a brand new therapeutic category, new product launch, new therapeutic category in an area that my previous company hadn't been in before. So to her, having that mix of how to do the job versus understanding the KOL's perspective and the clinical perspective, and even more importantly, the patient journey. In that team, there was someone who had been a payer nurse. So she worked with payers on reimbursement decisions and working on workplace solutions. So there was a nurse, there were a couple of clinical pharmacists who came out of that therapeutic environment, and there was a researcher, pure bench researcher that came out of that environment. Half of her team of 8 came from non-MSL backgrounds. The others had worked in rare disease, but never in this therapeutic area, but understood how to execute the MSL role. So they educated each other as this team formed and bonded. And her mix, she got it just right. She got it just right. And it was incredibly impressive to watch her build that out in that way.
Carol, thinking about this, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's essential. Part of there's 2 observations. One that I would have. One's an observation, and one is a question. One, the observation, what I'm hearing you say, and I think I would agree with you, is the hiring manager is really important to know. Number one, I would say what their strengths are, what their tendencies are, and really be honest about that, right? To be able to identify gaps or things that can help really empower for the betterment of the team to be able to close that gap. So it could be with a team, it could be the team itself, it could be really just for the units, right? About how to be able to advance things beyond what your current mindset is, right? Am I stuck in something that I've done 15 years ago that it's easy to continue that same thing, get the band back together and go for it? And it's easier when I don't have resistance challenging me or my current thought process. So I think we have to first have an awareness of what the type of temperament that we have, the thought process, and then be willing to look for those that think differently for us, for the betterment of the group, and being able to swallow a little bit of pride in that ways, knowing that our impact has that much greater chance to succeed if we have those different viewpoints. So I think that's one thing I've heard from you with that. I think the question that I would have for you on your example that you just shared, in that situation you provided, do you know, like, was there a specific question that she might have asked to those that didn't have the gap or had a gap in the actual role, but had that strength? What was she looking for in that person to make sure that it still messed with the overall arching objective, and what gave confidence to that? Was there a certain question that was asked?
Yeah. So Mary and I have talked about this a lot. And this is a passion area for me because I think that there's a huge manager responsibility in asking the right questions to allow the candidate to lift up to you an example of how they do the things they do and who they are when they're doing them. And I think that is something that this hiring manager and myself really kind of tag teamed a lot of the time. She was looking at trying to understand how they interfaced with the KOL in their current role. So whether they were a clinical pharmacist within these highly specialized rare units, what did that mean for their interface with the key opinion leaders? What was their leadership strengths within that dynamic? Were they able to assert themselves as a peer with the clinicians that they worked with? For me, I was really looking at how do you do that? So it's okay for someone to say, oh yes, I always make sure my voice is heard. I want them to tell me the ways in which they make sure their voice is heard. So I would say, you know, when the standard thing is, give me an example of a time when. And people tend to stick to that star format, situation, task, response. I want to understand the how, the challenge. And one of my favorite questions, and I might be preempting what we were going to talk about today, is what would you do differently if you had the chance to do that over again? And it's really important for me that people are ready for someone to ask them that question. So that was something that she was trying to look at, is how do you interface currently? And she was also looking at, do you understand what the role is and what it does? Do you have contact with MSLs right now? How do you interface with these MSLs? One of my favorite questions to them is, who's the best MSL that you work with right now? Tell me why they are the best MSL to you. What would you have them do differently? And how will you do that? So, you know, I think that there are ways that you can allow them to lift up very positively who they aspirationally want to be, whilst giving you examples that show you they understand what that is.
I love you asked the why, right? I mean, it goes back to the whole thing we talked about from insights. You want to know what's driving this, that it's not just a token answer. Like I think one of the things Mary shared to me, one of the things that you qualities, maybe we can just go straight to that, right? As far as the core qualities of a person, maybe that you would say is an ideal MSL candidate. What are some of the key things that you're looking for? I want to follow up. I think I know what your answer is going to be on one of them, but I'd love to hear you say it.
So, you know, there are things for me that there are things that you can teach, and there are things that come from within. One of the things that I value most in an MSL is curiosity. It's true scientific curiosity. You know, I shared with Mary that in doing insight training for MSLs, I gave all my MSLs a book at one point called A Beautiful Question, which talks about how as children, all we do is ask questions because it so orients us to our world. But by the time we hit our post-toddler years, by the time we get into kindergarten, we're down to about a quarter of the questions a day that we asked when we were toddlers and first had language. Because everything is why, how, when. You know, you're really looking for answers all the time. And we stop because we start to preempt, and we start to understand that there's no answer other than mom saying, like I did, because I said so. So, you know, it's not always going to help you. But I think that curiosity, some of the best interviews that I have ever had, almost felt that I was being interviewed by the candidate. And I love that. This MSL that I talked about in my Ask Me Anything, but he did that. He literally almost interviewed me. I was part of his story for that day, and it was very dynamic. And I think often that dynamism is born from a place of asking the right questions out of curiosity to really know the answer. So that's the first thing. I think that there are a number of, I don't want to say personality traits, because that's not what I'm getting at. But I think that understanding who you are as an individual because you can't have all red personalities in the team. Same token, you can't have all blue personalities. And if you don't have a little sprinkle of green in there, then you're going to have a very adversarial, whilst very action oriented, a very adversarial team. So it's not the personality traits as much as it is them understanding their own personality traits, that EQ. Do you know who you are, and do you know how to manage it? I mean, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but you can see my little building blocks here. I'm a red, yellow, blue, green. Green's at the bottom. I'm red, yellow, blue, green. So for me, I'm a creative driver. I could talk to anyone about anything, but I'm going to run the conversation, you tell. But you can't, I have to modulate that when I go and see a red doctor. I have to figure out how I'm going to work with my red to not bang against his. So that, if you don't understand that about yourself, if you can't step back from yourself to allow someone else to lead within a conversation, it's not good. And if you can communicate that you can do that through examples or through giving your vision of things, then that makes your interview even more powerful. And it kind of speaks to the idea of the how you do things. When someone talks about, I'm a great collaborator, tell me how you do that. How do you achieve great collaboration? Give me an example of it. And then get below that, because the example could be, well, I led all our team calls for the 2 years that I was there. I planned the agenda. I made sure that everyone was able to speak up. I maybe networked with our marketing and sales colleagues, but I want to understand how they did it. And I think it's getting down to that level below that really helps you to see if they understand who they are and use their strengths to get them in a winning position.
You're speaking his language. Hey, look how happy he is. Yeah, and we were just having that discussion yesterday, weren't we, about the insight, the color wheel. Can't think of what it's called. That might be correct. I don't know, but we were just talking about that. We were just talking about how you can't have a team full of straight reds. Yeah, I mean, you do have to have a good mixture of it.
It would be war. You would never get anything done.
I love, so yes, Carol, I think this was actually proof of it, because if you go back and look at a podcast or listen to a recent podcast, it was, I think curiosity is the #1 thing that I look for. And it goes much more beyond, and that was going to be my follow-up question. You already answered it, so I love it. But it's like, okay, so show me these things. How do they actually play out in the midst of an interview too? When you say that that's something that why you think you're appropriate for the role, I need to hear that in the midst of our conversation. Like, are you stopping to think about the question that was just asked? #1, it shows active listening. I think, and that's crucial to our role, is you, instead of going on to the next thing or just checking that box, you really need to stop and think, okay, wow, what is this really? #1, that helps build rapport with the people that you just said, right? You're building that rapport in a natural way, and it's an authentic, and you inspire people to want to engage you, right? In this world where you're being, quote unquote, attacked by multiple people. You get 200 emails in your account as a fellowship director with all these responsibilities. Why in the world would I want to spend my time with X MSL that's reached out and sent an email to me if I don't know what's in it for me, right? And so that's a component that really helps show that. So I love that was one of the things that you look for and listen for as well too. It goes back to how do they make you feel in that way as well too, right? So I love it. If I can take a step back real quick, what is your preferred method for your first conversation with a candidate? Do you prefer phone? Do you prefer virtual, and why?
So I think if someone is close by, I would always say, come along, let's have a coffee.
Okay.
Let's meet in the lobby of our building and have a coffee. But when you're recruiting in the USA, you could be in Boston and they're in San Diego.
Yeah.
As a hiring manager, I would always prefer to have a virtual, have a Zoom call, have a Teams meet. I think that the talent acquisition teams, it's often done over the phone. And I don't think, I don't find it optimal myself.
Okay.
So I always wonder whether or not candidates I really get to give the best of themselves on a phone interview. You know, everyone does the whole thing, smile when you're talking because people can tell. So much better if they're able to see that you're smiling. If you can see how animated someone is in their language, I actually think it's so much better. And you get that good first blush of whether or not, even at that point, they're going to be a good fit for your team. Versus their academic qualifications or resume rundown. I think you get a sense of who that person is by doing the virtual. And sure, it takes longer, but it doesn't really. Because if you get into a conversation over the phone that's 30 minutes, what's the difference in having a screen-to-screen conversation with someone for 30 minutes?
Great point. Great point.
And I'll say that most of my talent acquisition people that I work with, they don't do them virtually, they do them over the phone. And they say, oh, it doesn't need to be video. And so when you were talking, I was thinking that exact phrase, it doesn't need to be, well, maybe it does need to be video. Especially if you're, you know, we're still kind of talking a little bit about, you know, the first takeaway before we move into the next one, you know, is how you are working with your TA person to tell them this is how we need, this is what we need to be doing. This is what I want you to look for. And maybe the hiring manager should say, and I need you to do that first interview by video.
By video, yeah.
So why don't we hop into the next takeaway, if that's okay? Which is establish a logical hiring process. I guess maybe my first question is, would you say that it doesn't have to be the same process every time?
Totally, completely. And I actually think that, so sometimes you have the luxury of time.
Okay.
You know, you maybe have a very stable territory in an established product with a team that can support on the periphery. So they can fill in the gap while you go through recruitment. But if you're in pre-launch, there are very few companies out there that give you your full 2 years pre-launch timeline MSL team participation. Usually they tell you, go hire your MSLs 18 months, 15 months before, and it takes you 6 months to build a team out, 3 months to train them, and then they have 6 months to actually get out and form relationships. So the faster you can do that build out of a new team, the better it actually is for the medical objectives in the pre-launch environment. So that sense of urgency definitely plays into what you want to do for process. I know a lot of people, I was just talking to someone who is at senior director level and was going for a senior director level role with another small pharma. And I think she did 9 rounds of different interviews with people, only for them to then say, we've decided to delay until the middle of the year. Can we come back to you? That's crazy to me.
Nice.
That's really crazy to me. I think that you have to agree on how many interviews are we doing with candidates to figure out who we want to take to step 2. For me, that should be, as a hiring manager, if you are going to have a short chat with 6 or 8 candidates, pick out 2, 3, at the most 4 that you want to take into your interview panel. And that panel would contain, you know, your medical director, your medcoms person, maybe someone from marketing, someone from market access. but you see people breaking their hearts on LinkedIn all the time, going through this recruitment process. And I think as hiring managers, we have to remember that we are maybe fulfilling someone's dream and snatching it away from them in the matter of a week. So if you're not sure at all, don't bring that person just to fill out your numbers. You know, I think you've really got to remember these are human beings, and we have to treat our candidates with a high level of respect, because we want that from them too. Yeah. But I think that agreeing that process, I'm going to speak to them as a hiring manager, then I'm going to decide on what my next ones are, and then figuring out what does that look like. I am a huge fan of panel interviews. People shouldn't have to spend a whole day having 6 one-person interviews and then come back tomorrow to do a nice presentation for us on a subject of our choice. That's 2 days of someone's time. And we should be much more efficient than that. I feel as though pre-COVID, we probably were more efficient, but during COVID, we might have got a little bit more stretched out as part of not being able to bring people into the office for a candidate interview day. But I'm a big fan of 2 or 3 person panels. So maybe they do one interview with the medical strategy team and one interview with the non-medical strategy team. And you both look for different competencies or something. But I think that agreeing on that, what does that look like? What does the cadence look like for the candidates are pivotally important. If you have competency-based, and I don't know if you talked about this, Mary, so one of the first things that I did when I went to Takeda was I switched us from academic, educational-based roles and responsibility type job descriptions into competency-based job descriptions, which really talk about the how you do things. It would still give roles and responsibilities, but it had a huge focus on what are the competencies that we're leaning in on: business acumen, strategic thinking, self-leadership, qualities like this that we were actually trying to assess for in interviews. So I think, you know, deciding what is it we're going to look for and at what time gets you into a really good spot.
So there was one about the panel interviews. I wanted to bring this up. For years, I used to hear candidates say, I hate panel interviews. It's so daunting. I'm so intimidated. Until one person went into an interview and it was a panel interview. And she's like, I love panel interviews. I'm like, oh, wow, you must be crazy. And she's like, no, you know what's great about a panel interview is it's quicker, it's more efficient, but also you get to see the dynamic between the people on the panel. And
yes,
so you get to see firsthand what the culture is like.
Yes.
So that was probably about 12 years ago that somebody told me that. I'm like, I'm going to tell every candidate that says they're nervous about a panel interview why they should love panel interviews. And they're like the same thing. It blew my mind, but like, wow, I never thought of it that way. But yeah,
most panels you'll have different colors in your panel too.
That's right.
You will, if you sit back and observe the panel, you're gonna, if you start to struggle or feel you need a little bit of love, find your green personality, because they're going to help to anchor you into your process. So I actually think it's a really positive thing to have a panel.
Yeah, and I actually my hiring process here to have two people at a time. But so not like everybody at once, but 2 people panels to interview.
Yeah. You hit on something really important too as well, Carol, that I think that we don't always do this. It's, you know, we as companies, we expect loyalty of our employees, right, when they're in position. And oftentimes what's communicated is it's a one-way street. And so when I'm thinking about this in context of the interviews, right? So you talked about the 9 interview process or those types of things. How would I think it's important for us to put ourselves in the position of of the candidate as well too, to me. And can this be communicated even through the interview process, that someone is just as passionate about wanting me to be a part of their team as it is that I want, right? So I think we have to and especially as we're thinking about the different generations, et cetera, that really want to make an impact and value,
Very
we have
much.
to be able to communicate those types of things, right?
Right.
So
We describe ourselves as agile and then have a 9-step interview process. It makes no sense. It makes no sense.
so good, so good.
So how do you guys feel about a candidate showing interest, or I mean, because you want to hire people who want to come to work for you. And I know there are still some candidates out there that feel like they have to play coy as a part of the negotiation process. So they got to really want me. So so how do you, or maybe they're just not emotionally self-aware, that they don't realize that they're showing that they're interested in the interview. Like, I have a
Yeah.
thinking face that looks like a mean face. And so I have to be very cognizant of that, because, and everybody who's, when I'm listening to somebody talk and I've got my thinking face on, they're like, are you mad? Did I say something wrong? But my face is kind of like that. So I try not to do that. So, but you know, for somebody in an interview who might, they're processing and maybe they're not showing that they're interested. I mean, how important is that to determining whether that's the person you're going to select?
So I don't know if Chad wants to go first, but I will, because I started. So
Ladies first.
Yeah, I think that, so we're talking about the candidate's ability to recognize themselves and be able to show that. It's incumbent on the hiring manager to do the same thing. I have had candidates who, and I can think of one in particular, who would take 30 seconds to answer the question. And I'm thinking, okay. And remember, red, yellow personality, be brief, be bold, be gone. So I'm like, dude, you know, I'm almost ready for tapping my pencil. But after the second time, I said to him, I said, do you want me to clarify something about the question? And he said, no, I'm actually taking just I hope you don't mind, I'm taking a moment to think about this, because I want to give you the answer you deserve. Oh, I was just like, okay, all right. That was a total switch up for me. And I gave him as much time as he wanted, because he had then made it all about me. And I had thought it was all about him. So I think as hiring managers, you really need to take that moment to figure out what is actually going on here.
Let's skip down to the presentation. So Carol's got an interesting perspective on this. I'd like for her to share it. But you know, so when I'm working with a company, I'm like, okay, is there a presentation? The answer is always yes. Okay, what do you want them to do? And it's either we'll give you a publication and you prepare a presentation, or do it on whatever you want. But I think it's one of those things, we're doing it that way because that's the way we've always done it. And what are we really trying to get out of the presentation? So Carol, I would love for you to share with us, you know, your idea.
I think that we shouldn't do it the way that we've always done it. Mainly because, so MSLs historically, pre-COVID, would do a lot more presenting to groups. We would, you know, maybe present at grand rounds or hospital department meetings, or we would do a lot more presenting. I know some companies still have their MSLs involved in CME, some don't, or other learning activities, depending on where you are in the world. But I think more and more now, it's not the large group presentation with 20 people in the room. It's 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 2. Where you're actually given that formal, let me tell you A to Z what we're going to do here. So I think that what we should probably, how we get more out of seeing a candidate's fit it would be if we actually had them simulate an interaction. If we actually created a simulation whereby they were able to ask you questions, you gave them a scenario before the interview process and gave them time to prepare for that scenario. Doesn't necessarily have to be about your drug. Make it simple, because what you're actually looking for is how quickly do you establish rapport. I've given you in this scenario, for instance, a couple of objectives. How are you going to get to that objective? Maybe it's asking questions, maybe it's sharing some data. What does that look like? Now, a polished MSL may come in and say, steps 1 through 7, I will just do it like this. The brand new MSL, someone who's never been in the field before, is going to take a different approach. But if they've done a little homework, if they've met with MSLs, if they've maybe shadowed an MSL, if they've had MSLs come and call on them, they should be able to have a bit of a grasp. And I actually think it is really nice to see people's own individual take on that. And it could be a really nice way of getting past that presentation, because the presentation in and of itself, to me, is not of that much value.
I agree. I totally agree. I'm kind of I don't work at a pharma company, you know, but I kind of sit in the background. I'm like, what is the point of this? And because that's not really what the job is anymore. Not mostly, I guess.
And even
So-
if you do it, it's probably only 10% of your job.
Leaders develop leaders, right? That's the whole theme of this. And one of the things, Carol, if I can take away anything to really chew on, I'm going to be chewing on this. I think I like to say I'm one of these forward thinkers in industry and this, that, and the other. I have never thought, I think that is an amazing idea, because even when I'm thinking about this, I don't even like the word presentation. Like I like it to be, I want to have a conversation. When I want my MSLs to go in, I don't want them to say, I'll be present. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I want this to be interactive. I want this to be, I want you to, Doctor, why don't you walk through the slide? I'd love to hear what your thoughts were on how would you communicate this and from those types of things, right? Not, I'm going to be didactic. That is just not, there's no way to retain that, to understand how this might cause impact. This is a great idea. I think that's that's fascinating, right? That's because you're right, that may be a part of it, but it's such a small part in context of the day in, day out responsibilities. You have stretched my thinking.
So our final takeaway is a quick one, and it's self-explanatory, and that is trust your gut. If something is sticking out to you, then you gotta either investigate it further so that you can get your brain and your gut aligned. But yeah, you gotta trust your gut.
Love it.
Had an amazing conversation today. All of this information, I could tell, I knew that the two of you were gonna click. I mean, I knew you guys kind of were on the same wavelength. So thank you, Carol, so much for joining us today. And all of your wisdom, and of course, it's great to have you here too, Chad. But I'm kidding.
No, you're not. It's fine.
It was great, and I was very excited to see how much you were enjoying this conversation too. So as always, we just want to remind our watchers and listeners to be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything, and let us know, as you guys have been doing a really great job of reaching out to Chad and myself separately, that things you want to have on the podcast, discussions you'd like to see, the things that you've liked and the things that maybe we could be doing better. We're great with constructive criticism, so let us have it. Yeah, Carol, again, thank you so much. Any final closing words, Chad?
Carol, let me leave them with you first, and then I'll wrap it up. Carol came off mute, so I've got to at least see what she has to say. Something fun. It's got to be.
Let's hear it.
it's not so much fun as my dog is barking in the background if you can hear her. As a hiring manager, it's such a position of responsibility. You can make or break someone's career, but you can also make him break yours. Because as a manager, when your team performs, you do too. So use that privilege to really accelerate your career by lifting someone else up.
Servant leadership through and through is what I'm hearing out of that. And wow, there's not a better way to close. I don't think that's right. We are people first and foremost, right? And so how do we invest in one another? That's actually, I would say that's one of the best things that we can give that nobody can take away from us, right? So we can continue to choose to do that, whether you're in a leadership role in full capacity or whether you're an MSL, aspiring to actually have that title. You can lead wherever you are. And so with that, thank you again, Carol, for taking extended time. I have a feeling this is going to be a 2-part series with this, because we've had so much good content and don't want to take away.
Pleasure.
Definitely want to have you back at some point. There's no doubt about it. I've learned a lot. I know the listeners have learned a lot. The reality is, and we say this all the time, and I'll close with this, leaders don't develop in isolation, right? So leaders learn from leaders. And I think it's safe to say we have learned a lot from you today, Carol. So thank you so much for joining us on MSLE Chronicles.
And say bye-bye to Penelope for me too.
I will. She's over there woofing.
All right. Thanks, you guys. See you next
Thank you
time.
all.